My name is Gwen, and I am here to break the silence.
Content warning. This video contains sensitive discussions about prejudice, discrimination, and racism.
So we used to walk to school together and like all the time. Then we got to junior high school. And I had my head down, and when I looked up, they were running. They had turned and were running down the street. I never talked to them again. Never. And these were people I'd been friends with since first grade.
Hi, I'm Roman Davis, and I'm here today hosting our Break the Silence event. I'm sitting here with Gwen. And Gwen, why did you decide to break the silence today?
Well, thank you for having me. And I decided to break the silence because I just feel that each of us has a story to tell, but not for the purpose of entertainment, but for the purpose of building up and learning lessons. So that is why I wanted to break my silence.
And where does your story begin?
It begins in Brockton, 1968 to be exact. My family moved to Brockton from Roxbury in July of '68. So if you think about in 1968, the climate of the country then, in April, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And then in June, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. So there was just a lot of unrest that was going on in the country. Like integration was starting to take place where Black families were moving into like traditional white neighborhoods. So just a lot of tension, but we moved to 52 Mass Ave in Brockton. So I was 6 and my oldest sibling was 10. So there were 4 of us. So then they were 8 and 9 in between. And we were the first Black family in that neighborhood.
Wow.
We didn't know at the time because we were young, but being pioneers. But we got a very rude awakening. The day that we moved in, the next day, one of our neighbors put up a for sale sign. We were constantly just being harassed, which was strange because we were young. As I said, my oldest sibling was 10, and we had teenagers that were just very, very cruel to us. But there was just some type of fortitude that our parents had instilled in us. There were 4 of us. It probably would have been a lot worse, like had one of us been the only child. But we could play. We could break down 2 and 2 for kickball. We could play tag, hide and seek. And we just, we knew we weren't going anywhere. I think there were just 2 incidents that kind of made it real in addition to all of that was going on. Like the police were very much a part of the foolishness, the tomfoolery of our neighbors. They call the police and say our ball went in their yard. And then the police would come and tell us, make sure the ball doesn't go in their yard again. Like those type of things. And even though I was 6, I just knew that this wasn't right. My father was in the Navy, so he was stationed down in Rhode Island. So he was gone a lot. And I sometimes feel that because my mother was there with us, that made us even more targets. But so when he used to come home, I used to feel bad because, of course, we'd have a gazillion stories to tell him in regards to what was happening and how we were feeling unsafe. And then he'd have to go up and down the street, cussing out this neighbor, cussing out that neighbor. And I knew he was tired, because sometimes he'd hitchhike home because you could do that. You could do that back then. And he'd hitchhike, he'd be exhausted, but he would have to, not only be fighting as a military person, an unknown enemy, then he had to be fighting enemies in our neighborhood. And it's like, again, even though I was 6, I just knew that this didn't seem right.
So it didn't feel normal.
It didn't,
right? Yeah.
It didn't feel normal. And one of a young person by the name of Dougie in my neighborhood, he was the same age as I. And when I went over his house, I stayed out on the front porch and I heard him tell his mother, he said, I want to introduce you to my friend. He said, she's colored. And I remember, again, at 6, thinking, why did he have to tell her that? Did he think that if she had seen me, she would have fell on the floor? I was thinking these things and that kind of just left a weird taste in my mouth because, again, like, why did he feel the need to have to warn her about my skin color.
If you can remember, what were the emotions that you were feeling when you heard someone describe you as colored instead of saying, "This is just my friend"?
Well, by then, people were moving away from colored, so it was, in Negro, those terminologies, black was kind of coming in at that point. But I just remember feeling, again, like just the need of why. Like, why did he feel he had to tell her this? And again, it's a story that I can recall and see in my mind just as vivid as when it happened back in '68, as to me sitting right here and telling you about it now.
Well, I think you bring up a good point, the fact that when those situations happen, how much they stick with you and how much that builds a foundation of you as a person. And sometimes it's hard to get over those situations. And I think what you brought up is a good example of your parents' fortitude and how they raised you guys to kind of have that roll off your shoulder, but at the same time, never forget. So can you talk a little bit more about your mom and dad and how they raised you guys back in '68 and when you moved to Brockton?
Well, it was interesting because my mother, very devout Christian and very Bible believing. My dad went to church, but he was more of, if you're turning, my mother would say like, turn the other cheek, and my father would be like, punch him in that cheek. So we always used to, as we got older, we'd be like, we lived by the golden rule and also with the golden gloves. Because my father he was not having it. And he'd always, and I, again, remember, he'd always be like, whoever's the ringleader, you take them out. He's like, it's like bowling. When you hit the center pin, all the other ones fall. So if you get the ringleader, all those other ones are gonna fall as well. And again, and these are things that carried with us and, helped. I just have one brother, so that really helped him a lot because he was targeted a lot more with him being a black male than just a lot more white males in our neighborhood. But again, they were teenagers. One young man, he had graduated from Brockton High in 1966. So again, he was a teenager. Parents, it was interesting, and although it was wrong, like there were a lot of times, and maybe we took some of that from our dad, where it was like, we're ready for this fight today. We was even feeling back then, you don't want it with the Knowles kids.
Well, do you see the similarity with you and I guess other people's in our situation, I'll say our situation, right? That were raised kind of similarly to when your parents, and we brought those stories to your parents because they went through those situations themselves. It was a different approach and a different conversation that black parents have with their kids. And sometimes when you have those conversations, it's a little bit more difficult and a pill to swallow because you want to think everyone is your friend. You want to think everybody sees you as you. So talk to me a little bit about high school and how high school was for you when you went to Brockton High.
So by the time I got to Brockton High, it was in the mid '70s. But the Brockton High, where it's currently located at on Forest Ave, that came into existence in 1970. So the first 4 years that Brockton High was open, they had race riots.
Wow.
Constantly. Kids, learning was interrupted, very similar to how this pandemic has kids, because they couldn't stay, because the police were always up there. And a lot of the black kids felt, that things were unfair against them. There's a lot of similarities in regards to people feeling that injustices were taking place, that their story wasn't heard or their side wasn't listened to, because everybody that was involved, from the school police to the headmasters at that time, everyone was white principal. So you didn't feel that no one was going to give you a chance to be believed.
So did you take part in some of those riots? Or was
No, because they were done. By the time I got to Brockton High, it was in '76.
Okay.
But the year that I was graduating in 1980 was the last year that they had a race riot. There was something that had happened that popped off actually between two sets of brothers, the white brothers and these black brothers. Something at the a la carte. I don't know, the story's changed over the years, whether it was donuts, bagels, but some type of breakfast item. led to these brothers getting into it, and then it just spread from there. But I do remember that it was so quick and fast. In the Blue Cafeteria at the time, or Azure Caf, is where a lot of the Black students ate at. So a lot of us were in the cafeteria, and then outside was like a big mob of white students. And I'll never forget, like my sisters and brothers who had been at Brockton High during those other times, they were like so mad. You let those white kids keep y'all trapped in the building. But it wasn't like it was just so unexpected. But
Was it scary? Was it something that was
a little? It was, because it was almost like, I can't believe it's happening. And also too, just seeing the faces of people that sat in class with me that were out there like a lynch mob. And it was like, I won't be speaking to that person. Me, I was just looking and taking inventory. Oh, I won't be speaking to that person again. Oh, those type of things.
Yeah.
Duly noted.
Duly noted. So in those kind of situations, which we're kind of going through the same today, the difference is that many people of all different backgrounds are marching in the streets together versus, as you just said, a white only students are doing something like that. So what do you see as the similarities between what's happening between the 60s and 70s and now today in 2020?
The similarities is just that there's a level of either organized power or organized money that, the establishment recognizes. So because the Montgomery bus boycott, very successful, because people organized around, we're not going to do this. There's organization that's taken place, but I'm just not, the difference that I see is that I'm not sure of, like, around the cause. There's a lot of different things, defund the police, a lot of different things. And it's like, I feel to get behind one thing and let's push that forward. I do like the fact that it is everywhere, even in other countries. So that definitely shows a difference as well, and definitely the number of white allies, even the white allies that helped with Martin Luther King. There was a lot of stuff that had to be done very clandestine, under the cover of darkness, so that nobody would know. And now people are not caring if you know, they're calling out, standing up. And so that's a difference. Some of the similarities though of burning and looting of neighborhoods, like, that didn't work then, and it's not gonna, some of the same results are gonna be the same. I remember seeing Blue Hill Ave in Boston, like, just burned up and tore up, and I had to be grown before it was rebuilt back. So just like, that's not gonna work. Like, your neighborhood's not gonna be a neighborhood if you do that. Like, let's get a little something different in that respect.
Well, I think that's important insight from you too, especially seeing both times. And, as someone that is growing up in this time of the 2000s, I always question to myself every time something happens, people are like, it's the year 2020. How can this still be happening? Is that something that you heard in 1980? It's 1980. How can this still be happening?
Yeah. But again, I just don't think that there's really been a big enough push to make something different happen. I think that sometimes people can be predictable in what it is that they do, and we can say, well, let's do this, let's suffice here, and then everyone goes back to normal, not realizing, hey, if you really counted up in that column, you didn't get as much. You know what I mean? You got 4 quarters, and they gave you $1. Like, it's still $1, but you didn't realize that because you figured the 4 quarters looked at more than the single dollar. So, yeah.
Well, one question I have for you too is that, did you see it as political? So in the 80s compared to 2020, the conversation is really politically based. Anywhere you look at on the news, or let's say anywhere on TV, you have politicians, which is good and bad. Sometimes, you hear some really good things from politicians. Sometimes it's not the best that they are reporting out on. Did you see the same things in the 70s and 80s, or is this a little bit different in today?
Well, I think it's a little bit different in the sense of, like, people did not feel as comfortable as they do outside of like, like staunch racists, like you had a Bull Connor or Governor George Wallace, like people that segregation now, segregation forever. Like, this is me, but other people just didn't feel that comfortable being able to, and especially once like segregation kind of broke down in the sense, like, you looked kind of bad and people didn't, like, that was not the cool thing to do. If that was something how you felt, that was something that you definitely kept within the four walls of your home, because, it was very shunned. Now it's like everybody's coming out of the woodwork. And I think through social media, Facebook, like people are deleting people left and right off of Facebook. And I'm just like, well, that's kind of juvenile. It just seems like the behaviors, but, people are just feeling very comfortable with what they have to say.
Well, you are someone that is extremely inspiring, not only to me, because we've known each other for years, but, when I look at your history and what you do today, I would love for you to tell the viewer a little bit about Gwen Knowles of today. Your work, you do a lot of community work in the community to bring Black history to the forefront of everybody's conversations. So tell us a little bit about that and how we can get involved a little bit more.
Well, during the summer, my sister and myself, and my sister, just a little plug for her, my sister, Jacqueline Jones, she's the first Black female lawyer from the city of Brockton. And that was in '83.
Well, congratulations to her.
So again, I mean, it seems crazy to still be meeting or knowing her first, but the field had been so level, it hasn't was on a level playing field. So there's still first Blacks that are, that are coming out.
And as you said, hopefully we pass that threshold soon enough,
Right.
There's no
but
more
we
firsts.
taught a 4-week Black history course in the city of Brockton with the blessing of the superintendent, Michael Thomas, and with the help of John Williams, who was running a program. And he's like, well, if you need some kids, I have kids. So my sister and myself, we did the middle school kids. Willie Wilson, who was a teacher at Brockton High when I was there, a Black history teacher, he taught the adults. And then my niece and a Boston public school teacher taught the younger kids by Zoom. And it was just a really good course. We had 13 students that signed up and came continuously every Wednesday. So we are looking to be talking with the superintendent in regards to how we can keep it going. And what was important for us to be able to get across to the students, like the history of African Americans in this country began as slaves in 1619. But before slavery, there was kings and queens. Queen Amina, she was one of the most strong thinking queens. And she specialized in gold. Gold was her specialty in selling, importing and exporting. And then King Massanusa, he was a famous king. And it was interesting because the amount of money that back then, if you compared it to what it would be now, it would be $450 billion is the type of money that he had. So was it?
Wow.
I just think the conversation for our young people, you'll never know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. And again, this is American history that happens to be about Black people, but all of our history outside of where we were in Africa has taken place in this country, America. So it just should be taught. We even had a woman who took the adult class, and she said, I never knew, and she's in her late 30s, and said, I don't know where I would have got this information. So I just think that as we're coming up with trying to change policies and laws, that we really need to get our curriculum in control. And I work in education, I'm a guidance counselor. So it's always important for me, for the students that I'm working with, Black and white, just to present myself, because I did recently find out that one of my students had participated in a video that wasn't very positive. And it kind of hurt, like back in the day, because it was like I I've been working with him for years, and
Was the video race related?
it was.
Okay.
It was very. It was bad. It kind of brought tears to my eyes because it's like I liked him, and I hated that something like this had happened. But again, I don't feel the stories that I'm telling, I don't want them to be just because, oh, I feel like getting this off my chest, or, you know, listen to these horrible things that had happened. They just have to be lessons. They just have to be lessons learned. There was a young lady that apologized to me. I was in my 40s, and she took me out to lunch and apologized for how she had been back in the neighborhood. And she said, if I had did anything, I just want to apologize. So again, like, that's the type of results that you're looking for, because you don't want it to be like this always, because that's going to get no one anywhere. So I appreciated that she had did that.
Well, I think that's very interesting, and I think the viewer would want to know a little bit more about that. So can you tell us about that conversation and how that came to light?
Oh, sure. I think we reconnected on Facebook, and she had asked, like, oh, you know, would you like to go out to lunch? And it was like, sure. And then when we went out, and in the course of talking, she, you know, just felt the need to apologize for if she had done anything back then, and, you know, just tried to frame it in the sense of like the times people being with and hanging with, and no one wants to be ostracized. So she, you know, just wanted to apologize for her behavior. Okay. And I commended her for that, because on the scale of how people were behaving, like, hers was on the low scale. Those that were really, you know, leading a charge, like they and it's so funny because you'll see people and we'll look and it's like, yeah, I remember you. I remember you too.
But to that point, even though her actions weren't on the scale of others, did you still remember her actions even when she apologized for them?
Oh yeah, definitely, because again, she was in a circle. She was in a, like, my little circle of friends. But then by the time people get to junior high, and again, my parents say that's about the time that people, you know, are starting to look in relationships. So those type of like interracial relationships kind of break apart, because now families are like, hey, you know, it's one thing, you know, they'll be coming over more, just because I know that we used to walk to school together. It was like 3 of us. We used to walk to school. I was only black. And that's it. From 1st grade to 6th grade in my elementary school, I was the only black child. So we used to walk to school together, and like all the time. And then we got to junior high school, and we were walking, and I had my head down. And when I looked up, they were running. They had turned and were running down the street. I never talked to them again. Never. And these were people I'd been friends with since 1st grade. So by 7th grade, something had changed, and and even in high school, I really didn't talk to them. Now, some of them, you know, since we've been adults and times have changed, and I did not, but it wasn't that bad, because by the time I got to junior high school, I saw other, you know, I had black kids in my homeroom, and they were coming from like different areas in Brockton. So it's like, but it's like it made me had to kind of choose, in the sense of too, that it's like, okay, now my friends is gonna be black.
I'm just so sad even hearing that. That really does shape and frame how you view life after, and the fact that you're, just because of the chemical in your skin, people view you differently, which is just, and treat you differently.
But it could have, but it didn't make like us bitter. It just made us cautious, and also like, you don't believe everything you see. Actions speak louder than words, like
Absolutely.
those type of things. You know, because as I got grown and late in high school, like, I had white boyfriends, and
Okay.
and Elton John's like but again, my experiences are very similar to white America, just because of where I was at the time, and also what was on TV. I think Thelma from Good Times was the first black teenager on TV, and that was like in the 70s. So I saw people like Bobby Sherman, Davy Jones, the Monkees, like and they only had one radio. They didn't have FM radio. We only had AM radio. So RKO was what was listened to. So like I knew Parliament, but I also knew Terry Jackson's Seasons in the Sun. Elton John is one of my favorites because, again, what was just being out there at the time. There was one black radio station, but it came on from sun up to sundown. And then in Brockton, it was from Boston, so you had fuzzy, you had to try and, but again, I just thank my parents. And like I was the youngest, so my older siblings, like if white kids were being mean to me, or like when I had to wear an afro for the first time in 3rd grade, those kids were so vicious. I came home, I said, I don't ever want to wear an afro. And my siblings would get mad because it's like, stop, you stand up for yourself. And like when they made mean songs about me, my older sister was like, you go back and say this. So I had my little mean songs too. So, but it's like, and I thank my brothers and sisters for that, for helping to kind of instill something in me. And like, again, I don't even know where I know all my information about Black history from my parents, through church. There were just venues that you could get, and in the 70s, like all that cultural awareness was like, Afro Sheen and all this. So I just kind of grew up under that, and I feel a lot of that is lost now. So that's why it was important for us to want to bring these classes to the younger generation, because again, you need to know that the traffic light was invented by the Black man. You want to be able to add to a conversation. And also if someone says, oh, Black people have never done anything, you can say, oh, well, they did this. First open heart surgery was by Dr. Daniel Hale Williams. Dr. Charles Drew helped blood plasma get to the point that the American Red Cross, so those type of things.
It's important. Very important.
I think that you can find the information even more. Thank goodness for like the internet. You can just hit in Black inventors, a whole list.
As they say,
that'll come up.
The Google. Well, I think our time is coming to an end today, and I think me and you can honestly sit here for 3 more hours, 4 more hours, and continue this discussion. But what do you really want us to get from this conversation today, from you breaking the silence today?
That there is a history that's there, like marching again, that boat Amistad, those people tore up that boat. So it's like there's always been an organized march around injustices, but to take it and really to push it forward and to build and learn. Again, it's not for the purpose of getting likes or having how many people can see that you've done this. It's really for building and for learning. And for teaching. It's like, let each one reach one, teach one.
I think that's a perfect way to close this segment. Gwen, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for breaking the silence.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Yes.